Welcome, everybody. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my knowledge, what I've acquired over the years, and share it with you so that we can have a healthy discussion on certain topics which are quite intriguing, as I may say. Now, there are certain incidents and accidents which have a number of causes, contributory causes, but from the human factors perspective, a lot of effort has not been put into it. I'd like to highlight a couple of them. One of them is inattentional blindness during visual approaches. This is peculiar to visual approaches, and it has to do something with our attention. So, what is attention? Attention is basically a behavioral and cognitive process of selectively concentrating on discrete stimulus while ignoring other perceivable stimuli. So, when we are focusing our attention on certain things, we are basically directing all our focus on one thing, though that possibly could eliminate other things from our visual field. So the presentation goes in a way when we discuss attention, expectation bias, confirmation bias, inattentional bias, a couple of incidents, accidents, the prevention strategy, and finally, what is the solution, the conclusion. So attention, I said, is about focusing. So in the next slide, I will show you a target, a red color target, the usual target you see, with the bullseye in the center, but without any clutter. So try to look at the center of the target, the bullseye, and see how clearly and you can see it, discernible, the colors. And always the question in your mind should be what is common between a phone conversation while driving and what could have been the world's worst air disaster. So as I go through this presentation, you should keep thinking about this question, which we will discuss at the end. Here's the target. If you see the black dot in the center, without putting much effort, you can visualize it, see it clearly, and concentric circles around them. Now, if I introduce some clutter around it, you will have to make some effort to keep your eye and attention towards the target. So you'll have to focus your cognitive power to keep concentrate, not to get distracted by the clutter. So here you are in Paris with the Eiffel Tower behind, cars and cafes and people around. You could see the red targets, but the black one in the center will be a difficult one to do. So you'll have to focus your attention, more attention as compared to the previous one. In this presentation, we are discussing some incidents, three of them, two in more detail. The first one is the Air Canada 759 at San Francisco, which was a very close call. Second one, Canadian North 9131, Fort McMurray, a similar one. And third is a maritime incident, an accident, which we will briefly discuss. This is a US nuclear reactor, which met with an accident with a Japanese shipping trawler. If you look at this 759 profile, you would see on the left that San Francisco airport has parallel runways which are crossing each other. The yellow line depicts the approach path which the aircraft was clear to land. The runway of the left of the yellow was closed. The arrival was at night, and the runway lights for the left runway were closed, shut, and there was a cross placed, illuminated cross. But for some reason, the pilot aligned to the right. If you see the red line, that is the taxiway, Charlie. And the pilot aligned to that. There were four aircrafts on that taxiway, Charlie. Aircraft flew over the four aircrafts. On the right, you would see what would be the profile of Air Canada 759. This shows 51 feet. Some places it's given 100 feet. But as told by The NTSB guys, it was about 10 feet. Coming back to the Paris presentation, while you were focusing on the target, did you miss out something? There were a number of children crossing the road. Did you notice them? If you did not, you were suffering from inattentional blindness. Things on the periphery dropped off while you were focusing on the target. So let's discuss more about it. The second incident, the Canadian North 9131. On the left, you see the flight profile, and on the right is the airport diagram. The aircraft carried out an instrument approach on localizer, if you see the red line, but for some reason, when they were in visual contact, they turned left, aligned to the taxiway, wherein a Dash 8 was taxiing. They did not see the Dash 8. They came as close as 54 feet before they were told to go around. And this is a classic example, the US nuclear reactor. And there was a Japanese fishery training and research trawler. The nuclear reactor had the commanding officer and other officers at the deck. There were certain guests, and they were demonstrating the capability of the nuclear submarine. During one of the maneuvers, they're supposed to go down in an emergency dive, and after that, release all ballast, come up quickly, surface. In this maneuver, the submarine itself surfaces over the water. That's an emergency procedure. So, in order to demonstrate, they took the safety precautions. The commanding officer, who normally does not scan, did the scan. They put the periscope up, they did a 360-degree scan so that there is no fishing trawler or ship or anything which could be harmed anywhere around it. He confirmed nothing. The officer in charge did a scan on the periscope. He did not see anything. Then they performed the maneuver. When they came up, the stern of the submarine went through Ihaimaru. What is common in all three was that there was something in front, very obvious, which nobody could see. It has something to do with our cognition and attention. Missing out the obvious. Now, these are two very famous books, Inattentional Blindness, written by Aaron Mack and Irwin Rock. These people came up with this, with the inattentional blindness while they were observing players playing football on the pitch. They noticed that while the players was focusing on something, they would miss out the obvious, maybe the ball or a pass, and they wondered why it was happening. So they did a research on change blindness and attentional blindness, and they came up with inattentional blindness. The book on the right, Invisible Gorilla, everybody is aware of it. The gorilla in the room, where the children are playing, the school-going kids are playing basketball. They're so engrossed in playing basketball that a gorilla man dressed in a gorilla walks by, and nobody notices them. So inattentional blindness happens when somebody's focusing too much attention. So everyone has limited cognitive processing capacity. They may have memory, but limited processing capacity. So when it is overloaded, then the brain shuts down certain parts of it. So intense focus can even make you blind, even to the stimuli that normally attract attention. Another would be when engaged in a demanding task. So unexpected stimulus can go unnoticed right in front of your eyes. So keyword is unexpected. The brain does dual processing of attention. So you could be in automatic mode. We are normally most of the time in automatic mode because we have our heuristics. Heuristics are self-made rules which are applied to different situations. For example, good is associated with white, black is bad, going up, company going in losses is red, coming back to profit is black. So we have made our own rules which we are applying in most of the situations. We are not in the cognitive zone. So automatic is because cognition, we are cognitive misers. In automatic processing, cognition occurs with little effort. It is automatic, specific stimulus. It does not interfere with other mental processes. So basically, we do not have to put in much effort. But when it is a controlled, it is expensive, which means we really have to think. It is serial processing and triggered by presence of environmental stimuli. So if we are doing a mental maths problem, the more difficult it becomes, the slower we become in our physical ability and cognitive ability, because we are focusing our attention or cognitive part to that mathematical sum. Other things which led to these things are expectation bias and confirmation bias. Expectation is basically the state of the brain that reflects prior information. So we already have some prior footprint or map in our brain, and we try to match it with what we see in the environment. It basically leads in day-to-day life to faster processing and acquisition and interpretation. Whereas confirmation, once we have acquired information, we will do everything to conform to it, even though the sensory inputs are giving data which are contradicting to what we have agreed to. But because of this bias, confirmation bias, we continue with our belief. There are about more than 100 biases. So it is important to know which one triggers when. A couple of them, 17 odd biases are very important, which everybody should go through. Coming back to San Francisco, this is the runway. Runway 28 right. Runway straight ahead, you see what the aircraft was clear to land. On the left is the runway which was closed. On the right is a taxiway, which the aircraft actually made the approach. So how could the aircraft make an approach on the taxiway with 4 aircrafts on it? Let's see. So pilot had a mental picture of the runway looking like this, what you see on the left, because he had flown to the airport so many times. His mental picture was when he sees the runway 28 right, there would be a runway on the left. That was his mental image. So at night, when he approached the runway, aligned to the taxiway, he saw one lighted surface on the left. So that basically aligned with his expectations. If you see the left, there is a landing surface on the left. And at night, he was on the green line with a landing surface on the left. So basically, one of the runways, the runway lights was closed, shut. So there were only 2 landing surfaces which were lighted up. So expectation bias came in and he confirmed, yes, when I see the runway, there should be a runway on my left. Now comes Fort McMurray. This is a Boeing 737 Canadian. The captain had been to the airport a number of times. And this picture on the left is the mental image he had. You have the runway and a taxiway on the right. So this is what the pilot had in mind. What did he actually see? Because he came after a long time, another taxiway was constructed. So on the left of the runway, there was a taxiway now, which was more prominent than the taxiway on the right. So we have the runway and the taxiway on the left. And there was a dash 8 on that. What did the pilot do? He tried to match his mental image that when I see the runway, so there should be a taxiway on the right. So landing surfaces. So if you see the third image on the right, he was on the localizer. When he came visual, he said, no, there's something wrong. Why is there a landing surface on the left? So he turned left to align the mental image so that the second surface remains to the right. San Francisco, left is the day simulation of the scenario where the 320 Air Carrier 759, you can see. And you have United Airlines 1, Philippine Airlines, and another United Airlines 863. So the pilot approached on the taxiway thinking it was runway 28 right, because 28 left was closed and the lights were switched off. So expectation bias, confirmation bias. But why did he see these big airliners with almost 1,000 people in? So this could have been the world's worst air disaster after Tenerife and Turkey Dadri. The night simulation, as conducted in the simulator later, is on the right. This aircraft would have been here had it landed. It missed the Philippine Airlines by almost 10 feet, as we are told. If you see the profile picture, this is the real-time photograph which was taken by the CCTV cameras. United 1, Air Canada 759 approaching, and this is another profile picture. So maybe there was some lighting which he confused and he was aiming for, that he made an aim for this. If you see, why would anybody approach a taxiway? Okay, you get confused. But while conducting a visual approach, what are the cues that you get for a vertical profile? So the PAPI, as you can see, is on the main runway. There is no vertical guidance on the taxiway. So the pilot obviously is diverting all his attention, trying to figure out his vertical profile. So in this process, he basically cut out his field and inattentional blindness kicked in. Adding to that was fatigue. They had been up for almost 16 hours. And in the second Canadian, they were up for almost 16 hours. The duty was 11 hours, but they have been up for 16 hours. So these are things which affect inattentional blindness. There are other research done on them by Christopher Wickens of University of Illinois. He was conducting simulator experiments on aircraft with head-up display. So head-up display is supposed to gather all the data and present it in front of the pilot so that he does not have to move his head. So if he is looking outside, the pertinent data is in front of him. It's supposed to enhance safety. But as per the experiment, he came to a different result. So while conducting the experiment, he came to the result that when experimenters put something unexpected but important in the pilot's field of vision, such as an airplane on the runway, pilots often missed objects. Why would that happen? So that is inattentional blindness because of unexpected, which is a keyword. Because pilots have such an incredibly high visual attention load, and that too on an approach when the pressure is highest, configuration changes, communication, checklist. So that is when it causes breakdown in attentional allocation, which becomes critically important. So as per the result of his research, he says that head-up display does not guarantee that events both on display and in the world beyond the aircraft will always be detected. So even though you are using higher technology, but the human and his cognitive powers are limited. If you overload or it gets overloaded for some reason, it basically shuts down other parts of the brain so that the task in hand gets priority. And in that process, certain unexpected and obvious objects can be missed out. So in conclusion, we can come to say that fixed gaze or attention can lead to visual impairment. Unexpected objects in the field of vision can be missed out. Brain has limited cognitive processing capacity. Brain can memorize, but processing is limited. Human bias adds to the onset of inattentional bias. It leads in and basically builds up the pressure. Fatigue, 16 hours of being awake, as per the research, reduces cognition to 75%. So what are the solutions? Solutions number one to any problem is training and disciplined use of SOP. So scanning, if you keep scanning, you don't keep gazing at one particular object or place or point, so that you do not put all your cognitive power at one place. You have to keep on scanning. That is the first thing. Another is a Japanese concept called Shisakanko. Shisakanko is called pointing and calling. In Japan, they tested it on the bullet train drivers, the very high speed trains. They point and call. So they are focusing their attention where they want to see. So what normally we do is we are looking without seeing. That is when accidents happen. But if you point and call, you are focusing your attention to that exact place where you want to see. And they have reduced accidents by almost 35%, error rates more than 80% because of this. And even CASA Australia is promoting pointing and calling. If in the cockpit we point to the knob or a switch we are changing, then we are basically switching off or correcting or changing the right parameter. The role of pilot monitoring as it is very important. In the last webinar, we discussed on unstable approaches, the psychology of unstable approaches. It is the pilot monitoring who plays a very important role. And in this particular incident, the San Francisco, his role was found wanting. The training standards were found wanting, but there were a number of issues which the investigators itself did not pay attention. We can discuss that during the Q&A session. And last but not the least, which is now in the forefront of every error, every incident, fatigue risk management. So how do you manage your fatigue? The system, the human himself. So that is a big issue now. Coming back to the question, what is common between a phone conversation while driving and overflight of taxiway by Air Canada 759? If somebody has come up with a solution, you can put it on the chat board. Otherwise, during the question and answer session, I'll give you the solution or the answer to it, which is very interesting and which you will find that you never thought about it. So with this, my presentation has ended, and now we can have maybe a long question answer session to make this topic more interesting.
Thank you, Amit. Once again, we have everyone here, and obviously a lot of people may be having a lot of questions very, very specific to this subject matter. I'll quickly go over to the chat box and have a look at very specific. Captain Mustafa, he mentions that this approach or this issue of managing the runway in case of a parallel or a taxiway or the main runway can be taken care of by doing a correct approach briefing. I believe that is very, very relevant an answer, but rest assured, a lot of other factors do come into play. My question before everyone else walks in is, how do we enable the pilot monitoring, and what is his core function in case of a multi-crew environment?
Well, in an environment where there is a lot of stress, as it is in today's environment, the pilot flying is engrossed. So the pilot monitoring should not follow exactly what the pilot flying is doing. Otherwise, he'll also fall in the same trap.
Right.
His job is to monitor his instruments, as the book says, secondary instrument, the captain's instrument, the captain himself. So if both of them fix their gaze at the same thing, both of them are locked, basically. So all their attention is directed to the same place, and they are suffering from the same bias. So to prevent them, one person has to be unlocked or should have a good view of what's happening. That is how he'll pull the other person out. So that is the only solution. Disciplined use of SOP.
Right.
Monitoring has a bigger job.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Thanks for the answer. Anyway, let's bring people in as we have a lot of questions that are there. The question goes, when there are two or more runways, we always call out correct runway identified, for example, 20 right. And once again, this is not a question, this is more of a point. But calling out, I believe, reducing this inattentional blindness issue?
As I said, the Japanese concept of pointing and calling. So just calling becomes a routine or a habit, which everybody does. So when we do the checklist, a lot of times it has been noticed that the call out is given for the sake of call out. It is not visually checked. But if you point towards that particular place and call, so if you have the runway in sight, you point to the runway and call, which means you are looking at the runway. So here they had the runway in sight. In fact, just before landing, they said, confirm clear to land, and I see some lights on the runway. So the ATC obviously looked at the runway. He said, no, runway is clear. You're clear to land.
Right.
So that is the issue. Unless you point, which means you are looking down, how could they miss 4 aircrafts with all their lights on and the beacon on, the taxi lights on? So it is, unless they are in a physical or psychological state wherein they are locked or blind, which was explained earlier. So that is the case wherein the pilot monitoring has to help him out. First, the pilot has to verify. So that verification helps.
Perfect. Well, once again, a point coming from Nivedita is that is exactly what he meant. Identify, point, and call, and then confirm. So this is a very correct way. Let's move on to the next question, and we do have a few more.
Let me.
Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can I interrupt? Let me try and share with you a very interesting video if it comes up fine. This is pointing and calling in Japan.
Okay.
You see, notice the way they do it. It's a fast forward, so it happens very quickly. It's called Shisakenko. So the door is closing, the cargo door, and this person is basically pointing towards the door until it closes. So the chances of the incident are less because he is watching the door. Normally people look toward the handle and close the door when accidents happen. And the second is, this is the train wherein he'll keep on pointing towards the gauge and then call out. Even though he's alone, but he's directing his attention towards what he wants to see. This is the door. So they will point to what they're doing. Normally people just gaze and look. They call out, but it's not there. So this is pointing and calling, which has helped basically reduce accidents and incidents.
Can't these problems be avoided simply by following localizer, glide slope, and GPS?
Certainly can be. See, in the first case, they were carrying out a star, an instrument approach followed by a visual approach. The Air Canada SOP said as a backup, you have to tune the ILS, which procedurally they didn't do. So they fell into the trap. But how do you explain the second one? They were on the localizer, which means they tuned, they were on the localizer. When they had the runway in sight, they turned left. They left the localizer, went to the taxiway, even came down to 54 feet, almost the threshold. They didn't see the Dash 8, wherein the Dash 8 called out and they had to carry out the go-round then. Had they landed, it would have been disastrous. In US, from 1962 to 2007, there have been 267 cases of wrong surface landing.
Wow, that's a big
these
number.
are landings. How many have carried out and gone around are much more. So this is a big issue.
Right. Point taken. Next question, quickly, from Muhammad Awais. The difference or relation between inattentional blindness and or decision-making fatigue? What's the difference between the two? I'll rephrase the difference between the two, or the relation between inattentional blindness and
Decision making is a process where you, based on your inputs, take a decision. So here, they could not see what was in the visual field, which means they had their sight focused on one part of the runway where they were planning to land. But what was ahead of them, all the big aircraft, the 777s, they just disappeared. So this I can answer when I answer the prime question, which is the commonality between a phone conversation.
Perfect. Next question. Next question. Aware, stick around. You'll get the answer in a little while. From Nikhil. The question goes: degradation of manual flying skill is a well-known issue and being addressed in the simulator. Do you feel the training fraternity is doing enough to address a degradation of monitoring? Monitoring is a skill that needs to be trained. Our policies and training don't have enough.
I agree with you completely. In fact, in the last webinar, if you remember, Fahad, we had spoken about pilot monitoring, that not enough is being provided, information being provided to exactly where does the pilot monitoring look during certain phases of flight. Whereas by default, he has been given the maximum responsibility, even higher than what the pilot flying. So as the book says, the pilot monitoring has to scan his instruments, the secondary instruments, the pilot flying instruments, the pilot's physiology, and the pilot's psychology. So imagine a 250 or a 500-hour pilot, will he be able to do all these things? So he should be given specifics. And the French authority, which has done a survey, a study on go-rounds, has written it in the report that in most of the go-rounds, the pilot monitoring did not know where to focus. So if the pilot monitoring is startled or surprised by the action, so he is of no use unless you tell him where exactly to look, what call out to give in a specific situation. So that disciplined use is very important.
Right, perfect. Glenn has an input. I agree with him to a great degree. The input goes. Glenn believes voluminous NOTAM packages can take a bit of the blame as well. I believe that is true. Next question from Ardhan. And the question goes, we have same experience on January 27, 2014. You can browse the reference, final investigation report. The aircraft was landed at taxiway at Juanda Airport's Surabaya, Indonesia. Stated about visual illusion as contributing factor and the absence of the spatial information. Do you think they also contribute to the San Francisco incident?
Well, I'll have to check what exactly happened in the incident that you're narrating. But visual illusions, of course, they are contributory. But in this presentation, what I'm trying to highlight is things, unexpected objects, big objects like an aircraft can disappear from your field of vision. So contributory causes are a number of them. So as I said, expectation bias, confirmation bias, illusions, you can be hallucinating because of fatigue, your a lot of cognition power is reduced. So all these things are contributory to finally what happens. So what you say is correct. Illusions also contribute, but not to that extent. Ultimately, your brain has to process. So if the brain is overloaded, then it shuts down a number of things. And in that process, you could make errors. So ultimately, the focus is on the cognitive processing power of the brain.
Good enough. Good enough. A question from Fahad. In case of the San Francisco incident, what about the lead-in approach? Just missed them.
Well, if you see the number of incidents, the maritime incident, 2 people saw. So same question comes up: how can they miss? When 2 people scan, how can they miss? again, this question will be answered by the final question. So
Good
please
enough.
wait.
Good enough. Good enough. A question from Dranub, or maybe an addition. It all falls back to the initial training of instrument rating, or instruments.
Well, as I was asked in the previous questions, one of the previous question about the flying skills, degradation of flying skills. It is not exactly the degradation of flying skills. Our scanning capability is lost or reduced. So if we know the reference parameter and if we know how to scan, where to scan, if you notice, the earlier generation aircrafts had a T-scan. So we had the instruments aligned so that we scan in a particular pattern, T-scan. Now we have the PFD. So everything is integrated in one display. So that T-scan doesn't have any relevance. But the training community is not training people on how to scan. So what is a scan now? It is a radial scan. So you scan from the center, attitude, go left, come back, go right, come back, go top, come back. So if your scanning is correct, then you are not basically focusing too much attention on one thing, and it will not overload your cognitive capacity.
Perfect. An addition from Captain Mustafa, transition from automated mode to a visual one is a critical moment that should be chosen once all clues are correct. I believe that is relevant. The next question from Asude, if I, pardon me if I'm not, I believe more important like cognitive biases and perception, which is very important in the decision-making process in pilot training and all training levels. What do you think about it?
Well, in any capacity, as a human being, you should know your limitations. And understanding how the humans behave, human thinking, cognition happens, that basically reveals a lot about a person. So unless a person knows his limitations, generally, if it has been seen in most of the risk-taking capability, risk perception, the person in question feels that it will not happen to me. And what the other person, if the other person is doing the same thing, he's doing it wrong. So it is human cognition. It is also said that we arrive to a conclusion while doing cognition. The first conclusion we arrive, we stick to it. So it is called self-satisficing. So when we start thinking about possibilities, options, the first solution we come up, we stick to that. We do not go beyond that. So humans are cognitive misers. So unless you know your limitations, you won't know that you are in which situation you are in. So this bias, people, if somebody is not aware, he won't know. So, and the other person also will not know that the pilot flying is suffering from this. So awareness, education, training is the prime, that is the foundation.
Do you think in pre-COVID time, the global shortage of pilots with increase in air travel demand played a contributory factor in some quarters of such incidents?
Well, you see, the shortage term is a misnomer. There is no shortage. If you do not have pilots, then there's no point pushing pilots to do more. So you have to lay a limit. So your operational capability, if you want to enhance, you should have enough pilots, which is the foundation. Now, here in this particular case, it is a lot to do about the training capability and the standards. I'll give you the example. The co-pilot. So Air Canada follows Advanced Qualification Program, AQP, which is supposed to be a very good program. So the co-pilot failed his command upgrade twice. So he failed his command upgrade. He was, the remarks written were about his situational awareness and CRM. Those are very negative remarks, and which we can also see in this issue. wherein the co-pilot was asked what was he doing during the approach. He said, the captain told me to find out the inbound track, and I was busy looking at the iPad. So can anybody believe that? Would it be possible? And the most glaring thing is, after he failed twice in his command upgrade, he was sent back. So he had to requalify as a co-pilot. When he requalified, the remarks written was good situational awareness and good CRM. So I can't comprehend that a person failed twice for situational awareness. Overnight, how can he change? So training standard, and these are called inter-rater reliability. So rating of a person suddenly changed just because he had to qualify him for a co-pilot. And look what this ended up. So training standard, somebody has to keep an eye on the ball.
Right, right. Well, let's move to the next one. Captain KK has a suggestion: by recognizing your own weaknesses and then doing self-skilling to improve can surely be helpful. I certainly believe that helps. Glenn, personal opinion, yes, I do, but I was trained over 30 years ago. Yeah, well, old school is old school. Masood, it is also recommended to keep shifting your focus. Don't simply keep gazing into airspace or in the cockpit on one object or direction. What do you think, Glenn? Amit, on this? Do you think we should keep shifting focus? Should be continued.
Yeah, that is the first thing I said. Scanning. You should keep on scanning. And
Agreed.
humans are most of the time in thinking mode. So it could be thinking in the cockpit, or you could have drifted out, or you could be preoccupied, you could be distracted. So you have to break the chain of errors. So how do you break the chain of errors? First thing is, in safety concept, they call it decoupling. Decoupling the situation, which means do not group too many tasks together, space them apart. And second is, you should keep on scanning, which means you are not paying too much attention to one thing, that it leads to the second thing. So if you scan, move your head or move your gaze, it comes back and you see the picture with a different perspective. So that also is part of change management. When you change your gaze, then you relook the picture in a different, so you see something new. So
Right.
these two pilots, unfortunately, were focusing on the same thing.
Right. Okay. Let's quickly wind this up, and with the question that you had in the end, there's an answer that's come across from Nikhil. Um, is it that the human mind and memory is constructive in nature, looking to fill in the blanks? So when ATC said the runway was clear, the crew simply believed all was focus on the approach and not cross-check what the ATC said. Same with the phone call. Rather than holding the phone, it's the brain space used in having the conversation. So that's the answer. Once again, with you, Amit, do you agree with this, or do you have another answer for us?
I quite agree to him, and congratulations. The answer is, we'll take the phone call first. So what are the traffic rules? That do not hold the phone and drive. If you
Right.
put the phone or use a hands-free, it is safe. That is false. Because if you hold the phone and you're having a conversation, your skills are not degraded. So basically, when you're having a conversation, your cognitive power is diverted. When the phone is on the holder or wherever you're using a hands-free, still you're having a conversation. So your cognition is occupied. Take an example. A lot of times it's happened that you leave your house for your workplace. You reach the workplace. During the journey, you're having a conversation. After you reach, you don't remember how you came there. But you stopped at all the red lights, followed all the procedures, but you don't remember. Second example is, if you are driving with your wife or you're having a conversation with your mother, intense conversation. So a lot of cognitive power is occupied there. And now you have to do a parallel reverse parking. So while reverse parking, you would notice that you stop hearing the clutter. I won't call it clutter, but the conversation. Right?
Right.
So in a
Perfect.
lot of studies, it has been proven that inattentional blindness can also transform or translate, move to other sensory organs like hearing. You must have read so many accident reports that the GPWS was blaring, pull up, pull up, pull up, and wondered why weren't they doing anything? Because everything becomes silent. The brain shuts off hearing because you need intense, you need to divert your attention to a very important task. So even though it may be intriguing, but the brain plays a lot of these tricks just to help you out. But it is you ultimately who has to break out of it, or the other person helps you. So that is the conversation part. So now in this, when you are diverting, focusing your attention maybe on the landing surface on one particular object, so brain basically does not register unexpected objects. If you study accidents, the transport accidents, almost all the drivers have given in the statement that the car or the vehicle or the human being came into his line out of nowhere. So how is that possible? So that person or the object was always there. It is because his mind, his brain was occupied in one conversation, so that the unexpected events, if a car comes in suddenly, he won't be able to see it. Or if a person comes in suddenly, unexpectedly, if he drives normally, everything is fine. But unexpected objects are not. So a pilot does not expect an aircraft to be there. So when he confirmed anything on the runway, the ATC officer said nothing. So that also confirmed to what he believed. So now he never expected. Normally when we land, we don't expect 4 aircrafts on the runway. While taking off, yes, we scan that the landing aircraft is vacated or there is no aircraft. But landing, when you're clear to land, so we do not expect these things. We do not expect a wildlife suddenly crossing the runway. Normally, day-to-day course. So these are unexpected things. A jeep coming across. It happened recently with one of the flights. So you do not expect all these things. So if you are focusing too hard, so there are two things. You focus too hard and unexpected events. So these two, when are there in combination, then you go blind as far as your cognition is concerned.
Perfect. Good enough, Amit. Once again, it's been a pleasure. It's been a long 1 hour session for everyone who is there, but I believe it was the most interesting one that we've had till date. I would request the CEO of Phoenix Aviation Safety, Glenn from Australia, come up and say a few words. Glenn, you have the podium.
Thanks very much, Fahad, and thanks again very much, Captain Amit. Once again, a very informative, educational and very practical demonstrations of the fallibility of the human mind. Of course, with a multi-crew situation, you can magnify those cracks, and if we're not aware of how fallible we are, we can become inattentive. So thanks again very much for a fantastic presentation. Thanks to all the participants tonight. I'm sorry we may not have gotten to all of your questions. If you want to revisit this webinar, it will be on YouTube without the technical glitch, which I must apologise for. I'm going to have to edit that out, but it'll be on YouTube probably tomorrow. But thanks again, and I hope you can look forward to more interesting, informative webinars such as this. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn, once again. For everyone who is there, the QA or the questions that are left over will be copied or will be there on the comments section on the YouTube page. The video itself will be linked to Phoenix Aviation Safety LinkedIn page as well as the YouTube there. So, and all myself, Amit, will be having connections or links up on our pages as well. For everyone else who is there, I certainly believe inattentional blindness is a reality. We really have to keep our gaze or turn into a focus period of time, scan patterns, training in the simulator, pilot monitoring, and all the other aspects that we have discussed have to be kept in view if we want to ensure that this thing does not catch us off guard. With that, I would once again say thank you to all who have joined us and who have borne with us for the that we have in between. We'll certainly ensure doesn't happen again. Beyond that, Amit, once again, pleasure having you, hosting you, and for everyone else, hasta la vista. This is Foxtrot and Mike signing out.
Thank you very much.
Good night all.